All right. Well, I think people have stopped kind of trickling in. So I think we'll probably get started. Thanks everyone for joining today. My name's Kyle Shute. I'm the Land Protection Associate here at Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy. I'm filling in for my colleague Emma, running the Lunch and Learn today. And just some logistical stuff before we get started. If you have any questions, um, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll sort of be monitoring that, and if there's anything that might be a good fit for answering or discussing, sort of in the middle of the presentation, I'm happy to interject that. And then if you have other questions too that you want to drop in the question and answer section, then we'll either save those for the end, or if there's a good fit in the rhythm for the middle part of the presentation, we'll be happy to answer any of those questions. Um, and especially if there's any technical difficulties or anything, feel free to just drop those in the chat, and I will keep an eye out. So with that, I'm gonna toss it over to my colleague Chris, and Chris is gonna do some introductions. Thanks, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Lunch and Learn. My name is Chris Cossey, and I'm Stewardship Manager here at SHC. Significant part of my job is coordinating management on some of SHC's preserves. Um, and while this requires time and effort and sometimes a little good luck, it's always a goal to connect people to these places through partnerships that increase our capacity to implement critical land management. And it's truly special and important when this connection facilitates inclusion in new ways. So when you find yourself focused on controlling invasive species to improve wetland and riparian habitat in partnership with the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, and their coordinator asks if you would like to be connected to an ambassador from the National Wildlife Federation's Artemis Sportswoman program, I suggest you say yes. When you do, and you're connected with Lisa Fierman, you know that you've been gifted with a rare opportunity to do something different. Lisa's from Georgia, but has worked in Western North Carolina with Outward Bound since 1994. Her professional background is largely in education, specifically experiential wilderness-based programs, classrooms, and whole school environments, and also organizational development. She started hunting about 12 years ago and currently works as an Artemis volunteer ambassador. And without further ado, I'll let Lisa tell you all about it.
Thanks for that introduction, Chris. I'm going to start, well, in a second, I'll start my slideshow, but first I want to kind of echo what Chris is saying, like the collaboration opportunities that I'm having right now, I think are just so meaningful. And I really appreciate the North Carolina Wildlife Federation for the support that they've given me in terms of connecting me to people both as participants for Artemis programs and also more partners, including the Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, which has so far has been a really exciting and stimulating just incubator for ideas and connection. I also appreciate that I've gotten to work with the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Division and have had some good support from our local game warden and bear management educator. So I appreciate all y'all. Um, and I'll start my slideshow by sharing my screen. Okay, awesome. And then, okay. Um, so I want to thank you all for coming and encourage you to spend some time visiting the Artemis Sportswomen website on the National Wildlife Federation page. Artemis is all about creating an inclusive and welcoming environment for sportswomen to connect socially with one another, to learn together, and to offer leadership both as educators and also advocates for conservation, and for wildlife protection. I am the Artemis ambassador for North Carolina. Artemis Sportswomen is a national organization, and we have 53 ambassadors, and I think currently like 34 states. And there's some paid staff at the national level, but everybody else is a volunteer. Some of the programs that I've done so far this year, I've had a couple mentored rabbit hunts over beagles that the Artemis ambassador from Tennessee brought in to hunt with me and some local women. I've hosted a social meetup where women who are interested in just finding who are other people around here who are also either already hunting or fishing or just curious about it. Um, I've hosted in partnership with the NCWRD and also with the North Carolina Wildlife Federation two bear-wise presentations where Ashley Hobbs, the special projects biologist, has given a really interesting presentation about how we in Buncombe County can live with bears in a way that um, doesn't endanger or put them into peril or us or our pets. And I encourage y'all to find that bear-wise opportunity. And then I've also delivered a scouting workshop, and we're going to have another one on Saturday that is attendant with this lunch and learn. Um, Before I go into the content, I want to thank Guy and Judy Gardner, who are long-term volunteers with the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, and they have a leadership role in Fall Line Outdoors, which is a chapter of North Carolina Wildlife Federation over in the middle of the state. They they've offered me a little bit of mentorship in how to do community building and hunter education, and they have shared some of their fantastic resources with me. um, this this slideshow that I'm delivering today is largely content that they've created, and I really appreciate that. And I encourage y'all to check out if you're interested in learning more about hunting, fishing, and conservation. Check out their website, Fall Line Outdoors. They have a lot of resources that you can view on there, and they have events that you can participate in. So, the starting question here is why hunt? I never grew up hunting. Um, there's a researcher over at Amherst College who looked into this and said, mostly people are hunting to experience nature and to connect to the wilderness and wildlife around them. Another big reason for hunting, and this is a big part of it for me, is um, developing end-to-end competence with procuring and safely handling and preparing my own food has been a really meaningful experience. Um, Hunting gives us an opportunity to never stop learning. I learn something every time I go out, and it's a really nice way to spend time with people doing something positive outdoors that, with some of my values bias, takes us away from technology and the distractions that we often find, in our home environments. Um, Hunting is also really important for conservation. I'm trying to move this little. Oh, there we go. Um, Hunted animals stay wary of people, and that wariness helps them um, keep their distance and not get into trouble eating garbage or getting hit by cars. Um, Places where wildlife are pressured by hunters, the impact on the actual there's not really a population level impact from regulated modern hunting practices. We have come a very long way from the unregulated market hunting of the 17 and 1800s, during which people, killed, as we all know, like the passenger pigeon or the bison or the birds of South Florida, in numbers of the millions and billions, and at times of year that would have a devastating impact. We have a lot of regulation that protects and manages the number of animals that we have, but the hunting act as an activity helps keep the animals wild and unaccustomed to people. Um, and hunters fund conservation. There are excise taxes. There's a Pittman-Robertson Act that 11 to 13% of the cost of any hunting or firearms related equipment or supplies, that tax is baked in there, and that money goes to the U.S. Fish and Game, and then it is administered to states. And the formula for by which the state agencies get that money it's based on how many people buy hunting licenses in those states and how many people are volunteering and participating in the Wildlife Resources Division programs and activities. Huh. Uh-oh. There we go. Um, the idea of hunting success might mean just spending time outdoors and being present and that is a good enough reason to go hunting. If you are hoping to harvest an animal to take home to eat, success means having that, deer come through when you're hunting, having that deer not know you're there, and have you be ready to harvest it. You have practiced with your firearm or your bow. You know how to take a good shot. You know how to not to pass on a shot that might be too hard for you or not a good shot. And you've got the skill to recover, to blood trail your animal and to field dress it to start cooling down the meat and protecting it from bacteria in the field. Um, well, this came through in two different words, but where to hunt? This is often, one of the obstacles for hunters. Well, we have 2 million acres of public hunting access in North Carolina. Um, you also may know people who have property on which they would welcome you to hunt if you ask politely. There's other options that you can kind of get into a business arrangement to hunt, and you can also put in for special hunts once you have your hunting license through the state game agency website. But we're here to talk about deer hunting, so let's talk about deer. Um, Deer are ruminants, so they don't graze like cattle or elk. They browse, which is why they seem to like only the newest growth on the flowers in your yard or the baby leaves on that tree you've just planted. Um, Deer, whitetail are can live in diverse habitats and they thrive even in urban edges and in a place like Asheville where we have so many creeks that provide travel corridors. Um, Deer can show up in the middle of town. Now, they're not necessarily thriving because they may be in a place where their density is too high, and you'll sometimes see a visible browse line where they've eaten the whole understory someplace. And that generally means there's not enough pressure on them. They're not being hunted or they don't have other predators. And, they're kind of spending a little bit too much time, too many deer in that area. Um, I think everybody will probably have heard of the rut, which is what we call the peak breeding season for deer. Around here, it's in the first week of December. The time before peak rut is when the deer are moving around the most. So if you're hunting and you're spending time in the woods, that's when you're most likely to see the most deer because the bucks are traveling around looking for does, and the does are just actively participating in the breeding cycle. Um, Deer eat a lot of different things. They eat what we call hard mast, which is nuts like acorns and you know chestnuts. Well, chestnuts if they're there. They also eat soft mast like berries, fruits, persimmons, apples. They will eat the anything that's budding, and they will also come and eat your landscape. Um, There have been recorded observations of deer eating like baby birds that they find on the ground. I think deer will eat what they need to eat, but they eat primarily browse and forage. Um, Deer have 297 million olfactory receptor sites, whereas we have five. And I heard something the other day about bears, and I couldn't find it again, but bears had something, I think, in the billions. So if you're going to hunt deer, they're always going to be able to smell you if the wind is coming from you to them. So it's essential that you're paying attention to the wind direction. If you're planning to hunt at a stationary location that you've pre-selected, you need to know what direction the wind's coming from, and you might need to say, "Oh, I can't actually hunt that site today. It's not going to be any good." If you're traveling, you're going to want to keep the wind either blowing into your face or across your face as you're moving through the woods. Um, Deer, as is probably obvious to everybody on account of how big their ears are, have exceptional hearing. And even if they can't smell you, they are a prey animal. So if they hear a sound that doesn't sound like another deer or turkeys, they may bolt right away. If you're walking around in the woods and you're trying to hunt and a deer hears you, and you might know because you heard the deer move, or maybe they blow, stand still and just wait, because if they can't smell you, you may have the opportunity to, continue hunting that particular animal, or they may leave and then you can travel through the area you were trying to go to. Um, Also think about how much other noise you're making. When I'm hunting in the woods and I've got like a Cliff Bar, I will generally use a knife to slice open the wrapper rather than tear it open. I will sometimes decant my snacks into quieter bags. Um, and you want to be really careful that you don't knock plastic or metal stuff up against something else. Um, Deer have excellent night vision and they are crepuscular or diurnal. So they are traveling mostly in the low light times of the morning and the evening. But they don't see color the way that we do. They do see blue. So it's recommended that you hunt wearing earth tones or camouflage. But as we'll talk about later, blaze orange is not just a legal requirement for hunting during firearm season, but it's also just a good idea to be visible. But to the deer, the blaze orange looks like another color that's just found in nature and doesn't stand out as much. Um, if you start deer hunting and you're trying not to move, you will very quickly become aware how much you probably scratch your face or just fidget. Some strategies for dealing with the fidgeting are to hunt in a blind or behind some sort of screen of brush to help protect your fidget from being noticed by the deer. But as much as possible, you want to sit really still. You want to look before you go somewhere. You want to move slowly. When I'm walking through the woods, I try to stop at a tree so that the tree will break up my outline and not stop in the middle of an open area. And I try to be comfortable. If it's early season, I'll take a thermocell with me to keep the mosquitoes off me because I don't want to have bug repellent on. And if it's late season, I'll wear a lot of clothes and sometimes even take hand warmers with me because I don't want to be fidgeting because the deer generally see us the same way we see them, which is they are moving or we're moving. Um, some of the stuff that I think is really interesting about deer is how they communicate with one another. Um, and at the scouting workshop on Saturday, we're going to walk around on the woods and we're going to be looking at some of the ways that deer use scent to communicate with each other. They have glands that they will use to drop scent in different places so that other deer can come through and know who's been here. Kind of like the way we talk about dogs using the fire hydrant. Um, if you have the good fortune to be around a group of deer in the woods who don't know you're there, you'll hear them grunting and bleating and talking to one another. The bleating kind of sounds like a cow or sheep noise, and a lot of times if a doe has got fawns with her, she might make a noise to tell them like, "Let's go, y'all." Or if they're separated, they might make a noise to say, "I'm over here." Um, if you hunt, you will almost certainly encounter a deer snorting or blowing, which is an alarm call. There's something about your movement they didn't like, and they're letting the other deer know to go away. Um, Bucks will grunt to let one another that they're in the area, and you can actually mimic that grunt and sometimes lure a curious buck into you. Um, that whitetail that whitetail deer are so famous for operates as a flag, and it's another alarm that they can use to signal other deer. If you're gonna go hunting, there's certain things you need to have legally. You've got to have a hunting license, and it's got to be on you. It can be on you in the form of an app on your phone, or it can be paper. Um, if you're hunting with a firearm or if you're hunting during firearm season with an archery equipment, you've got to have blaze orange, and the regulations are spelled out in the regulations book. You'll also get this information when you take hunter education if you haven't yet. Hunter education course is a requirement for getting your hunting license in North Carolina if you were born before, I think, 1961 or 60, I mean, sorry, after 61 or 63. Um, but I like to carry a flashlight and a headlamp with me every time I go out hunting for just in case. Um, I also carry a little power pack for my cell phone. I don't always have cell service where I am. I have given my hunt plan to whoever isn't with me. But you can get a lot of great lists online of things to make, and through experience, you'll figure out what you need. But if you go into the woods without a knife and you're successful harvesting a deer, you're going to have a lot of trouble. So there's some basic things that you should always have, and then other things that change because of the season. Um, I'm not going to talk much about what tool to use for hunting. But each of these um, each of these types of firearms has a different purpose and different seasons. One chief benefit to hunting with archery equipment is that you can hunt all season long. There's an archery season that comes before firearm season, and you're always allowed to hunt with a more primitive weapon, a more primitive legal weapon during the season. So you can archery hunt during rifle season. You cannot rifle hunt during archery season. Um, and then what do you do when you go in the woods? If you just walk through the woods with a gun, kind of hoping you might luck onto a deer, you're not going to, because you're going to make a bunch of ruckus and they're going to run away. You can still hunt, which is a technique for hunting where you're moving very, very slowly, and you often will take breaks and stop and sit someplace, maybe where there's some natural cover. A lot of people prefer to hunt someplace where they've already determined where they're going to be, and if they're on private property, perhaps even established a spot and brushed it in with um, some camouflage netting or some tree branches. If you're going to hunt elevated, it's very important that you wear what hunter safety calls a fall arrest system, which I would just call like a full body harness with a lifeline. And I make myself tethered to a tree as I'm climbing up, and the whole time I'm there. Um, you can have a fatal injury or a disabling spinal injury from, a height I think as low as 10 feet. So it's really important if you're climbing a tree, if you're in a ladder stand, to be safe. Um, we talked about blaze orange. Even if it's your private property, you've got to wear a blaze. Um, and then I think the other part is like having a plan that makes sense for you and sharing that plan with somebody. You read stories in the newspaper every year about hunters who have a heart attack dragging a deer out from the woods because maybe they didn't exercise all year. Um, and they might not be in as good a shape as they'd been the year before, but they try to do something that they did when they were in better condition. If you're not in condition to hike really far into the mountains, then make a plan for hunting closer to the car. If you're not in condition to pack a deer up by yourself, make a plan with a buddy to help you when you're successful. And I think the other thing is, you know, being able to read a topographic map and use a compass. A lot of times, the excitement and adrenaline that comes from hunting or from exploring can get people turned around. So, not getting yourself into a situation where you can't navigate your way back out. And then also, just things can happen in the woods. You could get caught in the rain and get hypothermia. You could, twist your knee or ankle. It's really important that somebody who cares about you knows where you are and what time to expect to hear from you, um, how you're going in and out. I like to leave like my parking spot as well. And then if you can't communicate with the person who's got your hunting plan, I think it's really important that you don't change your hunting plan, even if something looks really good over there. There's another day. Um, being prepared for the weather, being prepared with adequate snacks and hydration, and for us, being prepared for ticks and poison ivy. The tick season here is going to go, well into archery season. I've been treating my hunting clothes with permethrin, and you can, I think, wash them like 6 times before you need to retreat them. I don't like to use um, any type of scented spray for deer hunting. Turkey season, I do because it doesn't matter. But and then I do a tick check every time I go out into the woods once I come home. Um, at our scouting workshop on Saturday, we're going to look for funnels, which are places where the landscape or the foliage encourages travel in a certain direction, and it creates a pinch point where you can often find deer sign. We're going to look for what are some of the things that, what are some of the plants that we want to come back to when hunting season opens because they might be dropping acorns or providing soft mass that deer want. We're going to look for signs that deer have recently been through, tracks and droppings, and we're also going to look for places that might be a little too obvious and might be full of other hunters. It's always good to have a plan for more than one place. So if you go in to go hunting and somebody's already in your spot, you can go somewhere else. There's some great apps that you can use for looking at the topography and looking at property boundaries. I use Onyx Hunt and I've been very happy with it. The Go Outdoors app is the app that your hunting license can be on, and it's a great way to look up regulations if you're unsure of something. And also, you're legally required to report your harvest if you harvested a game animal. Not, well, you don't have to report small game, but you do have to report deer, bear, turkey, and you can do that through that Go Outdoors North Carolina app. Um, so here's just a picture. You can look at the picture on the left and you know, see people have asked me before, like, well, what are you looking for when you're looking for a deer in the woods? And this sounds smart alecky, but you're looking for something that looks like a deer. Like deer have a very distinctive shape and a distinctive gait to their walk. And as soon as you see them in the woods, you'll realize, oh, I understand what Lisa was talking about. It's also good. I like to try to soften my eyes. So if you look at this picture on the right, take a second and see how many deer do you see in this picture? The one on the left, we saw the one, but on the right, and the two on the left of the picture on the right are really hard to see because their silhouettes are so broken up by the foliage, by the it's not really foliage, but the vines. This is where binoculars could sometimes come in handy. I don't always carry binoculars, especially during archery season because I'm hunting really close. But you can actually kind of see through trees with binoculars because they allow you to they're magnifying what's happening in the foliage, and then you can see like part of the deer, or you might see a lot of times you see movement in the bushes, and you might not even know what it is, but you know it was an animal back there. Um, if you have the opportunity to shoot a deer, it's really important that you take a shot in what we call the kill zone. If you're looking at this picture, you could kill a deer shooting it through the lungs or the heart, and it will die quickly. They almost always run. My experience, I think I've knocked down two deer in my whole life and two hogs, and every other one ran, and I had to blood trail them. I've had animals where later, when I was taking them apart, I could see that I had shot them through the heart, and they still ran 40 or 60 yards. They're very strong. They have a lot of adrenaline. Um, if you shoot a deer too far back, though, you could shoot it in the liver and it will die, but you may have a very hard time recovering it because it might take a while. And if you shoot it in the gut, it may take quite a long time to die. You're unlikely to recover that animal, and it's gonna suffer needlessly. Um, so the safest, most conservative shot to take on a deer is a deer that's broadside to you. And what you're looking for is trying to get that double lung shot. It gives you a good blood trail and it also assures like the fastest death for the deer. If a deer is quartering away from you, you can still double lung shoot it. When a deer is quartering to you, you're most likely going to have a hard time getting that second lung. So, you know, being prepared to not take a shot, having that discipline is an important part of being an ethical hunter. Um, we talked about this. You are legally required to report your harvest. There are limits and restrictions on how many deer you can harvest in a season, how many of what sex you can harvest in a season. And then, depending on if it's a special hunt, sometimes there are antler restrictions. I hunt a lot in Georgia, and sometimes I'll go onto the Wildlife Management Agency's property, which we call state game lands here. for like what they'll call as a bonus hunt, but it sometimes might be bucks only or quality bucks only, which will be defined by how many points need to be on the antlers. So it's another time where you have to have a good look at that deer before you shoot it, not just to make sure you're taking an ethical shot on the deer, but to make sure that you're shooting a deer that you're legally allowed to. Last year in North Carolina on public lands, and this was true the year before too, during rifle season, the only day that you could shoot does or bucks was the opening day. After that, it's bucks only, unless you were on private land, then there was a little bit longer period. Um, that's another incentive to become an archery hunter because through archery season, you can take does or bucks the whole time, which is, doubling or more than doubling, depending on the deer population in your area, your potential for shot opportunity. Um, and then here we're getting to, I think for a lot of people, what's the good part, or the most important part, the food, if you can harvest venison, you get this very healthy organic meat, a lot lower in saturated fats and calories, but higher in protein and iron than beef. It's got a little more cholesterol, but I think it's the good kind of cholesterol. Um, the process is, you start with field dressing. You've got to start cooling the meat and protecting it from bacteria as soon as you recover your animal. And then you'll break the meat down into major muscle groups. And I like to think a little bit about what I want to cook when I'm butchering meat so that I can sometimes, like, I'll take a top round, which is a muscle out of a hindquarter, and I will sometimes slice it lengthwise before I freeze it. I'll vacuum seal it, freeze it, and label it, this is for fajitas. Or I'll put trim all together and label that as this is for stew or grinding. So, I kind of prepare my meat while I'm butchering it for the idea that I'm gonna make some things are gonna be steaks, some things are gonna be roasts, some meat is gonna go to be ground for burger or for other ground meat preparations, and some of it I'm gonna mix with fat and make spiced sausages. And I like to make loose sausages. Some people like to make cooked sausages. Um, you can use venison in the place of really any meat in any recipe if you know how to adjust your cooking. The main thing is that it's very lean, and so it can get dry. And also, some of the cuts lend themselves better for different preparations. Um, these are pictures of corned venison and Reuben sandwiches that I made this year. That was really fun. And I have a friend who makes homemade rye bread, and so now we're doing a little sandwich club together. Um, Here's some suggestions. Lots of people love venison stroganoff. Backstrap is the largest muscle that provides steaks out of a deer. It runs on either side of the spine, and it's most people's favorite. Um, I also make jerky, which is really fun. But I mean, if you go online and start looking for recipes, you'll find zillions. And I'm a little notorious for looking for recipes before I have successfully harvested a deer because it's just really fun and exciting. I really like cooking, so I thought I'd share a couple more pictures. This is some Asian inspired food. The picture on the left is um, shaking venison. So if you go to a Vietnamese restaurant and get shaking beef, that same dish. And the one on the right is ramen, and that's actually wild boar, not venison, but I thought it was a nice looking picture, so I wanted to show y'all. And I made the broth myself too. I save the bones from the animals I harvest, and then I make stock out of them that I use to make like pho or French onion soup or ramen, or I'll use turkey broth, and sometimes I'll just salt the broth a little bit and drink it as like a hot drink. Um, this picture on the left was a Thanksgiving dinner a few years ago, and that is a turkey breast from a wild turkey and a little piece of backstrap steak from a deer. And the picture on the right, I kind of lumped these together because they're somewhat European inspired. Those are pierogies, and I made them with ground venison that was just cooked with some um, oil and salt and pepper. And then kind of I think I boiled them first and then pan seared them in brown butter. Um, I hope that y'all will be interested in getting involved with Artemis Sportswomen here in North Carolina. My email address was in the registration for this presentation. If you would like to be notified when we're having upcoming events, send me a message in that email address, and I will add you to my mailing list. You can also go to the Artemis website and learn about events and opportunities both locally and in other states. You're welcome to attend Artemis events in other states. I've had people travel here from Tennessee. Artemis is on Instagram, and my events will be posted in the Instagram page as well as the events page of the website. It's Artemis_Sportswomen. And keep reading the Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy emails for updates on future collaborations. I think that is the last slide. So I will stop sharing. Am I back on the screen now?
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome.
Um, Lisa, thank you so much for that was just an amazing presentation. And there's no way that you could have known this beforehand, but Reubens are my favorite sandwich, so it was really tough to see that on the screen,
Nice.
knowing that it's 12:30 right now. But a very innovative take on the Reuben, which I am definitely interested in. Um, but thank you for sharing all of that. And I know that I personally had a couple of questions. And folks that might have come up with questions during the presentation, if you want to throw them in the chat or in the Q&A area, please feel free to do so. Um, just to make sure that everyone's aware, I threw out the registration link for the Saturday tracking workshop in the chat. It should be up basically at the top of it. And it's open to anybody. So if you're interested in going out there on Saturday, please sign up, and I'm sure Lisa would love to be out there with you. Um, I know my question, and this past weekend, Chris and I both were in an outdoor wilderness first aid class, which I feel like we learned a lot in. But I'm curious about, for folks that, oh, sorry, I have a call coming in on my phone right now, and I can't mute that in my office. Um, but I guess I'm curious about for folks that are, interested in doing a hunter safety course, is there a portion of that that includes some amount of like wilderness first aid kind of work, or is that something that you recommend for folks that are going to be out in the woods?
So hunter education courses do not include first aid. I think they reference how good it is to get some first aid training. I have a wilderness first responder certification, and I think for people who are going to spend a lot of time in the wilderness, even if you're not responsible for other people, if you can take the time to get that training, I think it's invaluable, not just in preparation for handling a medical emergency or an injury, but I think in being able to kind of be more effective in preventing medical and injury emergencies. The wilderness first aid course is also a really good one, and it could be a good foundation for later getting the first responder. Um, but I think the biggest the my advice is whether or not you have first aid training, trying to be conservative and use good judgment, understanding, where some of the edges of your own like competence and skill lie. I don't want to discourage people from hunting alone, but if you um, are not very experienced in traveling, cross country in the woods by yourself, because you're not going to be on a trail, think about ways to kind of circumscribe the area that you're going to be spending time in hunting to limit the opportunities for getting in trouble. I think you're muted, Kyle.
Great, thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
And also, like, if you can have a buddy that goes with you, whether or not they're hunting, that's even better. If as long as they can be quiet.
Yeah, right. You don't want someone that's gonna maybe start scaring animals away.
No, but if
Uh,
you've got a friend who's quiet and good at sitting still,
yeah.
that's a good way to manage risk as well.
Um, there are a couple of questions about the tracking workshop on Saturday. One is, are there maybe going to be future opportunities for tracking workshops? I know that the only one we have scheduled is on Saturday. But I think SHC and Lisa are planning to work together on future events too. So I
Right.
would say keep an eye out on our events page. And Lisa, I don't know if you have other things that you've talked specifically with Emma about.
Well, so one thing is, it's not a tracking workshop, it's a scouting workshop. So what we're going to be doing, we're not actually going to be like trying to find specific individual animals. We're going to be walking around the woods and looking for like how do you figure out where the animals are traveling and how they're using the landscape. Um, and most scouting, like most of the most effective time to do scouting outside of when you're actually hunting is after hunting season, before the green up. And I've already thought about this. Emma and I haven't talked about it, but I think it'd be really natural to do, another scouting workshop in the winter, or maybe do one in the winter and in the early spring. You can actually see the historical sign much better before spring green up. We're doing this one now because of interest and like people who are trying to get prepared for this coming hunting season who don't yet have experience. But I think as we're building this collaborative relationship, we'll probably take a longer view on the calendar.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great. And for the same workshop, is there any way that folks should prepare beforehand, with like what they just like what to expect? You kind of just went over a
yeah.
little bit of it now,
So
but maybe gear and
yeah,
stuff.
I think Emma may have put that in the registration. The reason we're doing this workshop so early in the morning is because it's very hot this time of year. Um, and because you really need to have on like boots and long pants, and I recommend long sleeves, both for ticks and poison ivy, and also just like brush and getting scratched up. So in terms of preparation, that's the type of clothing to wear, and I think it's good to wear a hat as well. Um, Please bring water and snacks that you can carry easily. A little backpack's a good idea. Um, if you haven't treated your clothing with permethrin and you have some sort of tick spray, I would recommend that. And I think like just you're gonna get, even though we're gonna go early, you're gonna get sweaty. And I think like pre-hydrating and making sure to eat a little breakfast is good preparation. We're not gonna be doing like a super gnarly hike. And I've already visited this area that we're going and kind of determined that I think it'd be a nice place for us to walk around in the woods looking for sign. Um, we may, depending on the interest of the people who actually show up, we may climb up to a ridgetop and go visit a saddle. But we're gonna choose a route that is suitable for everybody who's present on Saturday. Did that answer the question, Kyle? You're muted again.
Wow, you'd really think that I would be better at this after, 7 or 8 years of using Zoom. I think so. It looks like that covered anything. If there are any specific questions that folks have that we didn't touch on, feel free to drop that in the chat. Um, One question also that I think is a good one is for folks that are looking, maybe they've never picked up a bow, maybe they've never picked up a gun, and are looking for that sort of training on kind of hunting focused, rather than, a lot of, maybe weapon trainings might be more sort of self-defense. But in cases where folks are trying to get those skills on, like I'm trying to use a hunting rifle, it's the first time I've ever used it. Do you have recommendations for where to kind of seek out that training?
Yeah, so the North Carolina, so every state's game agency has an education department. With us, it's the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Division, and it's not called it's called like I think it's called hunter education, and that covers your hunter education course, traditionally called hunter safety, that you have to get for your license, but it also covers a wealth of learning opportunities. So go to the state game agency website and poke around on there. There is a um, so Wildlife Resources Division has a number of shooting ranges that are open to the public and are free. Um, Not all of them are staffed, but there's one over by Canton near that lake over there. It's over, it's like a little camp there. Anyway, it's called the Cold Mountain Shooting Range or the Wayne Smith Shooting Range. They're staffed, and the staff will often help you a little bit. And on Fridays, they have a volunteer. Every Friday, they have a volunteer who's there like like a golf pro, Lake Logan, thank you. Like a golf pro who can help you. And I've gone, that's where I go to sight in my rifles for hunting season. And the guys there have been incredibly helpful. The guy who runs it actually invited me to join them at Haywood Community College at a National Hunting and Fishing Day outreach event in September. So I'm going to go and like I think try to connect with some of the college kids for Artemis. But that's a local resource. And you can also the state game agencies, like if you travel to Georgia or South Carolina or Tennessee, I would say look at theirs as well. I'm a little more familiar with the programs in Georgia because I used to volunteer with them and I haven't been volunteering yet with in North Carolina. But I think that the programs have models everywhere. Like in Georgia, I used to volunteer with a program called Hunt and Learn, where you had to apply, and it was for new hunters to be mentored one on one, and it was like a multi-day program, and you learned a lot about um, deer behavior, or if it's a deer one, and they also do it for turkey and whatever. And they had another program called Sharp, which stands for something that I volunteered at, where we took apart deer. You know, we had different like tracks in it, but in the afternoon we took apart deer. So look at the state game agency. There's another program called Becoming an Outdoors Woman that is, of course, for women, but that's available in lots of states, and you can travel for that. The one in North Carolina is now called Outdoor Skills Academy. They're no longer offering bow, but they have a big 3 day event that happens. The model is still the same. So it's like a 3 day event once a year, and then skills tracks that happen throughout the year. So you can find that on that website. Or if you're willing to travel to Georgia, they have a 3 day bow in early November that's at a Department of Natural Resources educational facility that also has camping. I mean, it's just there's a lot out there. You just have to dig around. Um, and then there's probably some like private instruction that I don't know about. One of the things that I'm doing as part of the mentorship for the women who are currently involved in Artemis and will be, working on for the women who get involved in the future, is some coaching for firearms and archery hunting. But there's also there's some like archery schools around, and you could learn how to shoot a bow that way. It won't necessarily they won't necessarily be talking about hunting specific stuff, but any time practicing the with the tool that you use for hunting is useful. And like the caliber rifles that I hunt with aren't what I usually practice with. I usually will practice more with a 22 because the ammunition is so much less expensive. Um, that might have been kind of a long-winded answer, but
Yeah, that's
I think
great.
you need to be proficient with the tool, especially in archery. But you know, I would say like the attendant skills are in many ways more important even than than that part that has you doing your actual harvest.
Yeah, of course. And then there's another question too that I think probably a lot of people might feel people that are really interested in the outdoors and are interested in maybe hunting or fishing, recreational bow or rifle hunting. They really love being outside. They really love animals, and so I'm curious if you have any advice for sort of getting over the hump of maybe I'm really interested in hunting, but I also feel uh maybe like an empathy for the animals and getting over that, like harvesting of
Yeah.
the animals for your sustenance.
So I don't know that I would say getting over it. I think that having um I don't think empathy is really the right word because it's animals and not people, but I think like um caring about this other life kind of in the individual sense of the animal that the animal that you actually harvest, as well as really caring about like the quality of life for the species and local population is an important part of hunting. I mean, what I've learned, like hunters, it appears to me from the way that kind of money flows, like the National Deer Association. Did I talk about the National Deer Association yet?
No, but maybe we could put a pin in that for,
Okay. Yeah.
like
So
for
like,
after this.
you've got these conservation organizations that are for and supported by hunters that provide like the majority of the funding for habitat management and protection and regulation around species. Um, you know, hunters are mostly hunting be it sounds weird, but like because they love this animal, they want to spend kind of this intimate, proximate time with this animal. Um, and I think I don't know anyone who's become like actually callous about the taking of the life. Um, I'm kind of rambling on this answer, but I think like the perceived emotional difficulty that might be a barrier to starting hunting, I think it might be greater than the emotional difficulty of actually harvesting the animal because in my experience, I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about doing that. Um, and the first time I killed a deer, it was very moving. I didn't cry and I didn't feel any regret, but it was really powerful to like touch this animal and kind of like realize like, wow, you were alive a few minutes ago and now you are not, and that's because of a decision I made, and I'm gonna get sustenance from this animal. Um,
Yeah, I think that's
I-
such an important point too, is
yeah,
in like the society that we all live in, we're
yeah,
so disconnected from where our food comes from.
yeah.
And
And I
it's such an important way to be connected to
Yeah,
food.
and I think that connection isn't necessarily overwhelmingly emotional. And
Yeah.
and I've also found that like the response to the animal that I've just killed when it's first laying on the ground is very different than as soon as the skin's off. Now it really just feels I feel like, oh, I have meat and I need to handle it carefully so that it's good to eat. And it that transition is not that difficult. I have not experienced that being that difficult to make.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And yeah, if you want to go into a little bit of some of those conservation organizations,
Yeah.
there's
So
there's lots of I guess like so my background is in wildlife
yeah.
biology, and there are a lot of organizations
Yeah.
that are these sort of collaborative groups of uh, a lot of hunters, and people that
Yeah.
fish as well, that support conservation work, ensuring these populations are persistent on the landscape, managing habitat, doing a lot of really important stuff.
Yeah. So there are, there's the state agencies and their job is, regulating the hunting and managing the wildlife and the habitat for the wildlife. So, by hunting, we're providing funding for these agencies who are able to maintain state game lands and kind of refuge areas for the wildlife in as we have like more and more like kind of urban suburban development. There's also national nonprofits. I really like the National Deer Association because they're doing all this conservation work, but they're also like incredible education and research. And I've learned so much. And the questions that you might ask, like, well, why do they have this rub? Why do deer make a rub or scrape? They have scientists at the University of Georgia who are doing like longitudinal study of deer, and then they'll do little articles or podcasts that you and I can read and get the takeaway from. So that's a really good one. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is an advocacy group that focuses on all kinds of wildlife related public policy. And, these are the folks who are like watching Congress um, and then encouraging us to raise our voices. The, um, I think that the other thing is like, my experience has been like, I can harvest and eat an animal and still like really love that species and want to learn more about it and want to protect them. The regulations exist for managing the population, and like by being a law-abiding hunter, you are helping the animals, even though that might sound a little counterintuitive.
Yeah, and something that might be interesting for folks too, just I guess the relationship between SHC and entities like the Wildlife Commission that are establishing game lands. In our land protection work, we work very regularly to acquire lands and transfer them to the Wildlife Commission so they can become game lands. And that can sort of range in exactly, what a particular game land is managed for. But, we're using some grant funding sources. to help acquire those lands, as well as sometimes the Wildlife Commission is able to bring funds that come from Pittman Robertson to projects so that they can, we can sort of pool our money and resources together to make sure that these lands are protected. So, when you mention like PR funds, Pittman Robertson funds, it is something that SHC works with the commission on, and it really does support, the broader access to public lands for folks.
Yeah. Kyle, I saw that Chris had put a question in the chat about forecasting future workshop topics. So a big part of what I'm doing right now is trying to connect with people who are interested in being part of who are interested in building our local Artemis community. And I'd like to respond to the needs and the interests of the people who get involved. Um, as long as they align with what I'm capable of delivering. Some of the topics that I have in mind for in-person workshops um, are mostly hunting related, and they might be around. I've had some requests already for like a deer processing workshop, and I'm working on figuring out a way that I could acquire a deer on a like that I could be able to schedule so people could register, and then I would teach everybody how to field dress and butcher and break down a deer. Other hands-on topics are like how to build a blind for hunting from the ground, how to safely hunt from an elevated position. I'd like to do some wild game cooking, either live fire or in a kitchen with people who are interested. I think that some of the foundational skills like map and compass navigation, if there are people who are interested in and need that, I think that would be useful. And I think for people who are interested in hunting and know how to like read a topographical map already, we could do some like e-scouting stuff, which would lend itself well to one of these lunch and learns for people who already know how to read a topographic map. I put together a survey for the people who were kind of already involved because I'd like to find out what do they want to do and learn. It might be outside of the scope of what I'm prepared to deliver, but really this isn't like my agenda isn't recruit hunters as much as it is build a kind of a safe and welcoming community and facilitate skills development and access for mostly women who want to hunt and fish, but not exclusive of men.
Well, we're just about at time. So Lisa, I just want to thank you so much for your presentation and your answers to all those questions. They were really, really thoughtful. And Chris, I don't know if you have anything you want to say to wrap up, but just want to acknowledge your time and appreciate so much your collaboration with SHC.
Thanks for having me. I have enjoyed every interaction I've had with anybody from SAHC, and I'm really excited about working with y'all.
Good, glad to hear it.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah. And this was recorded, so if other folks express interest in watching it and anyone online right now sees that, you should be able to check. I think it's going to be on our YouTube page. But yeah, it should be uploaded within the next week sometime by our education and development staff. So thanks everybody. I hope you have a great week.